Another way to differentiate is by modifying and amplifying texts. In this video, I'm going to show you two of my favorite resources for doing that, so that you can see that you don't always have to reinvent the wheel yourself, that there are resources that can help you to differentiate content for your emergent bilingual students. Right, the first resource I'm going to share is called Newsela. I'll move my screen so you can see it there. And Newsela, if you haven't already used it as a teacher or been exposed to it as a pre-service or in-service teacher, is a wonderful digital archive of different news articles that are relevant to topics you might be studying at school, or certainly relevant to current events that you might want to be discussing in your classrooms with your students. And one amazing resource or one amazing feature of Newsela is that you can modify text to different lexile levels that can be then differentiated to meet students' needs for students who are at different levels of English language reading proficiency. And so here's one example. This is an article that was published in 2021, focused on Betty Soskin, who is the oldest active park ranger. She is now 100, and she became a park ranger when she was 85. And this story talks about her work at the Rosie the Riveter World War II Homefront National Historical Park, which is a museum that's dedicated to women's involvement in World War II. And she became involved in this work and became a park ranger because she went to a planning meeting for this museum, and she saw that the experience of Black women during World War II was not represented in the plans for the museum. So she got involved so that she could tell her story about her experience working on the home front, as they call it. It's a powerful story about advocacy, about making sure we hear multiple perspectives on an issue. It's a really great piece to read with upper elementary and middle school students. Now, this text is written at a 7th grade level, but when you go into the website, which I'll show you in a minute, you can change that level all the way down to a 3rd grade level. And now when you're doing this, it's important to make sure that the content isn't lost. So I always recommend that you read what you're modifying, and make sure that if you're going to be asking specific comprehension questions, or you want students to get specific information out of a text, you make sure that it's still there. But as you can see here, the original text from the Washington Post says, when asked how it feels to be 100 years old, Betty Reed Soskin gave a subtle shrug, smiled, and said, "The same way I felt at 99. And then it goes on to say she's not just any centenarian, she's the oldest active ranger. Here you can see it says Betty Reed Soskin turned 100 years old in September. She's the oldest National Park Service ranger. So the information is still there. They're removing a lot of the language demand of kind of getting at her age and how she feels about that age, but still keeping the core information there that students would need to know to make sense of this story. So it's one really great way you can use this. And let me show you now what it looks like to use this resource. So Newsela is free. You can register for an educator account. And like I said, it has lots and lots of different stories around different content areas that could relate to content you're covering in school. So here is the story about Betty Reed Soskin. And if you come up here, you can see that this is the lexile level. So right now it's at max. And if I scroll down here, it tells me that max is a 7th grade level, or upper text level 7, I should say. Upper elementary school and middle school is text level 7. But I can reduce this down to a 1000 lexile, which is text level 6, all the way down to 620, which is what you were looking at before, text level 3. So just what's great about this is the content can remain focused on the grade level that you're targeting. So if you teach 5th grade and you want your emergent bilingual students to still be engaging with 5th grade content, you can ensure that they can still do that, but you're then modifying the language so that the text is a little bit more accessible. All right. And one other great thing about Newsela is that a lot of the articles are also available in Spanish. So this is one example from 2020, talking about the Black Lives Matter protesters. And here you can see that there's an option to change this article into Spanish. And you can even change the lexile level in Spanish too, to make the article more accessible to students whose home language is Spanish. Okay, so that is Newsela. Let me go back to our slides. All right, and one thing I wanted to remind you is that even though we're talking about modifying text, just as we talked about during the reading week, you still should not be just reading text in isolation, right? I don't know if you can see that board there. We still want students to be engaging with texts in a deep and meaningful way, which means that we plan before, during, and after reading activities so that students can make sense of text. Before activities for this particular reading might include eliciting and building background knowledge, like showing students a short video that talks about women's involvement during World War II. There's a great video that shows that was advertising at the time for women to become involved at the home front, as they called it, so to become more involved in working in industry as many men went off to fight. And it is notably, there are very few, if any, Black women represented in those promotional videos. So it's a way to get them thinking about the topic, and then also you can come back to it after they've read the article and think about, like, what did you see represented there? You can also pre-teach vocabulary, key concepts like we've talked about. Last week, you learned a lot of great strategies for teaching vocabulary. So there's certain terms that students will encounter in the article that they need to understand if they're going to make sense of the content of the article. So terms like the home front, Rosie the Riveter, maybe presenting who she is, National Park Service, park ranger, segregation. So making sure you still do that work before they read. And then, of course, while they read, the during reading activities might include annotation, teaching them different strategies for annotating the text, engaging in some small group discussion to talk about their understandings and their questions. And afterwards, doing some extension activities to apply their learning. So for example, students might write a report about women's involvement in World War II, or they might move from this article to writing a biography of other notable women of color. So while we're talking about modifying text, just a friendly reminder that we still want to have these texts embedded within meaningful units that we always have before, during, and after activities to help us make sense of text. Okay. So that is modifying, but of course we can also amplify texts. And what I mean by amplifying is that we take the texts that are perhaps part of our curriculum or the ones that we want students to be reading, and we think about other texts that also talk about that topic that could enhance students' understanding and might be written at different levels so that students can access the content in multiple ways. So it's kind of building into that message abundancy that we've talked about in this course. So here's another resource, Common Lit. If you haven't used this resource, again, it's a great place to find information about a range of different topics and texts and units that have been designed around different topics. So I pulled two examples here, one focused on contact sports and one on immigration. When I was working in Denver, one of the teachers I worked with, who was a 5th grade teacher, had a unit in her curriculum focused on sports. So this is a great set of readings that could supplement what she's doing in her class already focused on sports by providing students with different readings about the risks and benefits of contact sports to complement what they're doing in the classroom. And then there's also just collections of topics like immigration that include text sets. So lots of different readings about this topic that range, as you can see, from 4th grade to 7th grade reading level. So you could have students choose readings that are interesting to them, or you could pre-assign some and strategically group students so that they are working with peers who are at a similar reading level or language acquisition level. And then you could have them engage with that reading and do some teaching of what they've learned to their peers. So let me show you what Common Lit looks like as a resource. See if I can get out. Okay. So again, another free resource. You can sign up for it with your teacher email. And here is the contact sports unit. So this is an entire unit that's pre-planned. So you could teach this unit, or you could use pieces of it to supplement a unit that you already have. It's got some great lessons. It's got quizzes built into it. I downloaded the PDF here. So it's a 5 to 7 week unit focused on 8th grade. And you can see different informational texts here that are built in that you could pull from for your unit. And then here is the link on immigration. So again, this contains 41 different texts, all focused on different aspects of immigration, which is just a great resource that you could pull from or have students choose as they're learning about different aspects of immigration. All right, so that is all that we're going to be talking about for this video. So just a reminder to always think about ways that you can modify and amplify texts to make the reading and the content more accessible for your emergent bilingual students. I hope these resources have been helpful, and I look forward to continuing to learn with you.